Okay, today we have a 2000 A4 Quattro in the shop, which needs some rear brakes done on it. I've already replaced a caliper on the other side and the pads and the rotors. But I'm going to film this side right here and show you the procedure of doing brakes on one of these. So let's get to work. Okay, the first thing that we actually need to do is there's a sway bar link which actually is in the way of the bolts for the caliper backing. So I'll remove this first. And then the next thing that we have to do is we have to undo these bolts right here, which hold the caliper itself to the pad carrier and the caliper carrier. So get the prep tools here. Metal on metal. Boy, that one's really worn out. The other thing I do is I'll inspect and make sure this caliper moves. This is the e-brake lever on the caliper itself, and it seems to be fine. So the next thing that we want to do is we need to remove this piece right here. And now we have this piece off. What's very important on these is before you actually reassemble these areas right in here actually rust up, and then when you actually go to put the new pad in, so what's very important on these calipers, once you get the carrier off, there's these areas right in here and here and there that actually is where the pad actually goes in. And if these are not clean, as you can see, I can't even get the pad into the position in that. So I'll have to clean this. The method that I use is I actually use a glass beading cabinet to actually do this. However, you can also use just a regular scraper, like a triangular burr file. You know, anything that's actually sufficiently hard enough that you can actually scrape the rust off. So I'm going to actually go and glass bead this. Now I've actually finished glass beading this, and you can see like these surfaces here now are clean. Now you'll see pad will actually fit in there, no problem, and it also allows the pad to move freely and not bind on the rotor. Very important to do. Next step, remove old rotor, and you can see how, well, see how bad that looks. It's all crusty and flaky. This is the side where it actually went metal on metal. Just for comparison, this is what a new rotor looks like compared to an old one. Nice and shiny, smooth. You can still see the machine marks on it. One thing that's very important though is before you put the new rotor back on the car is you want to actually take some brake cleaner. I just use this stuff right here, and I spray it on a rag. And what you want to do is clean the rotor surfaces, get any oil or grease off of them. And that should pretty well do it. And what I actually use to actually aid holding the rotor in place until I have all the other stuff all back together is I just have an old lug bolt with just a big nut on it. I just put the rotor on. Screw that into place, and it just prevents it so you're not fighting the thing when you're trying to reassemble everything. The thing would be flopping around, and it's just a lot easier this way. It's one of my tricks. The next thing that has to happen is there's a piston in the caliper, which I don't know if I can really, you can see it, but this piston has to be screwed in. The piston is actually on a threaded rod which actually goes to the e-brake actuating arm here, and when you actually turn the e-brake arm, it actually pushes the threaded rod which is threaded into the piston out, compressing both pads and stuff onto the rotor, which is how the e-brake holds. Now, first thing that I do, because I don't want to actually rip the boot on the caliper when I'm actually turning it in, is, let's see, is I actually want to spray some lubricant inside of the boot, which also just helps prevent the piston from actually rusting up and helps it move a little bit more freely. In this case, I'm just using some PB. You can use just about anything. You can use WD-40. There's a half a dozen other penetrants that actually work fine. Now this is actually a special tool which actually helps compress the piston into the caliper. A lot of times you can do it with just a pair of channel locks. However, if you have this tool, it just makes life a lot easier. There. And once the piston's all the way back, then we remove the tool, which we no longer need on this side. And what I like to do with these slider pins, I inspect the boots. The boots all look good. You can see how these come apart. What I like doing is actually spraying a little bit of red grease. on the pin and on the inside the hole that it goes into, and then reassemble it, and do the same with the other one. And I like to kind of rotate it a little bit just to get the grease evenly spread. And then we proceed to bolt the caliper carrier, pad carrier, back on. And then what we do now is we just install the pads. Some people actually like to put like a grease on the back of the pad to help prevent squealing of the brakes, but these pads actually came equipped with like a shim on the back, which actually serves the same purpose. Whenever possible, I actually like to assemble the brake dry without grease. It's just the grease actually just collects a lot of brake dust and crud, and it just is not pretty. More of a preference than anything. So now that the pads are in, put the caliper back on. And it's important that these two spring things on the pads, which actually put tension on the pads against the caliper, which prevents them from rattling around when you go over a bump. So it's important to make sure both of those spring arms are underneath the caliper and there's not like one or two of them sticking out. And now we reassembled the sway bar arm. And there we go. Brakes are all back together. One thing that you actually want to make sure that you always do before you actually put the wheels on the car usually is get in the car and actually pump the brakes back up so the pistons and everything actually close down on the pads. Otherwise, what some mechanics have done, they've made this mistake where you climb in the car after you're done working on it, you go to back it out of the shop, and you have no brakes until you pump the pedal like 3 or 4 times. Many a car has hit a lift and other things just because of that. So please don't forget to pump up the brakes.